What is up, guys? Welcome back to another Fantasy Football 5 in 5. And in today's Fantasy Football 5 in 5, we are going to be covering the top 5 things that you do not want to do in fantasy football. Alright, so coming in at tip number 1, we have don't ignore the bye week. Alright, so the bye week can be one of the most important parts of your entire fantasy football season. Every single person on your fantasy team has 1 week that they will guaranteed 100% not be playing during the season. So you can see that bye week next to each one of their names on their profile card, and you do not want to start them that week. So the week that they're going to have their bye week, you're going to want to take them out and put one of your backups in, because if you start them, it will get you a big 0 on your fantasy football season, and that obviously is not good for your fantasy team. So if you can at all help it, do not leave your players in during their bye week. Alright, the second thing you do not want to do in fantasy football is forget about the waiver wire. Alright, so every single season, the waiver wire is one of the most important parts of fantasy football. These are players that are not owned by any franchise, and at least one, probably more, players per season on the waiver wire has a breakout season, and they can become a starter for your fantasy team if you catch them at the right time. So constantly looking at the waiver wire, that is a huge aspect of what can help you out with your fantasy football season. Alright, at tip number 3 of things you do not want to do in your fantasy football season, we have don't accept trades unless you need to. Alright, so lots of people accept trades, lots of people propose trades all the time. Alright, so if you receive a trade in your inbox, it's so tempting to accept it. So you look at the trade and you're like, oh, I guess they want that player, or they try to intimidate you by giving you a player from the team that you like, one of those two things. But almost every single time, they are doing one of two things. They are, one, trying to rip you off by stealing the better fantasy value from you but giving you worse ones, or they are, 2, know something about your players or their players that you don't know yet, and they're trying to either get rid of them or take them from you before they either do really good or really bad. So generally speaking, unless you let's say all your wide receivers get hurt and someone pros you a wide receiver for your running back, you might consider doing that just because you're missing that position, but otherwise, trades generally not worth accepting. Someone is trying to take advantage of you. Alright, coming in at the 4th thing you do not want to do in your fantasy football season, we have don't ignore injuries. It can cost you your season. So your players can get injured, and there are 3 different things that it might say on them. It might say out on them, and that means they're guaranteed not to play. Take them out of your lineup immediately. There is questionable, which means they might play. You're going to want to watch them up until right whenever their game happens, whether that's a Thursday night game, a Sunday game, or a Monday night game. And the last thing it says is injury reserve. An injury reserve, you need to drop them if their players is injury reserve. That means they are on the team's injury reserve, as in they cannot play within the next several weeks of the season. Each NFL franchise can only bring a very limited amount of players back from their injury reserve per season, and unless they're like a superstar type player, I would go ahead and drop that player if they show an IR next to their name. Alright, tip number 5 of things you do not want to do in fantasy football is don't trust the projections. Alright, I don't mean don't always trust the projections in fantasy football. I mean don't become enslaved into trusting the projections. Alright, so beside each player's name is their projected net points of how much they're going to get each week. Those are not 100% accurate. That's just some experts coming together and saying how good do you think he's going to do in the next week. So you can make your own projections about that. I almost never listen to those projections. I go with who I think is going to win based off of the matchups. Now, if you don't have time to look at all that stuff, the projections are pretty close to how good you think they can be. But if you have the time to look at the players, that is something that you can take into account when you're deciding who to start. Alright, that's all 5 tips, but I do have a bonus tip for you guys, and this one is don't give up. Alright, how often have I seen people go 1-4 to start the season, or 0-3, and think to themselves, I have got no chance of winning the season. They just delete the app, get rid of it, leave your league. Alright, so that is 2 things are really bad because of that. Alright, for example, in one of my main fantasy football leagues this past season, one of my friends in the league, he was off to a really bad fantasy football start. He went to the waiver wire. He got some really good players off of there. He stuck them in his lineup, and he came up and he stole the last playoff spot for me. I was doing great the whole season, and he knocked me out just because he stuck with it and didn't give up on his fantasy season. That's a pro tip. Do not give up on your fantasy football season, no matter what. because it's no fun for anybody else if you give up. It doesn't take much of your time to play fantasy football, and you can still make the playoffs and make a comeback and win your league. You never know with fantasy football. Alright, well that's pretty much my list. Hope this video is able to help you guys out with your fantasy seasons. Top 5 things you do not want to do in fantasy football. Be sure to subscribe down below. I've got a whole playlist full of top 5 fantasy football tips. If you guys want to go over there and watch some of them, I've got the playlist right over there. But yeah, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.